Most Christians jump from the cross straight to the empty tomb. Like the disciples spent those days calmly waiting for a miracle. But the Bible shows something much more human: fear, confusion, grief, and locked doors.
That already changes the story. Because we say, Sunday is coming, but they were living inside Friday and Saturday without understanding what Sunday would mean.
Exactly. We need to slow down and look at what the text actually shows. After Jesus died, before they understood the resurrection, the disciples were not celebrating fulfilled prophecy. They were mourning what looked like the end of everything.
So here is the question for the comments right now. Were the disciples waiting in faith, or were they hiding in fear?
And be honest, because most of us probably would have been hiding too.
The Gospels tell us Jesus had spoken about his death and resurrection, but the disciples did not fully grasp it. They heard the words, but the meaning had not entered their understanding yet.
That is the part nobody wants to admit. Jesus told them, and they still did not get it.
Yes, but can we blame them? Resurrection was not a normal category. If someone you love is publicly executed, your mind does not immediately say, "This is going according to plan."
Correct. Crucifixion was not just death. It was shame, humiliation, political terror, and public defeat. Rome used the cross to send a message. This is what happens to people who challenge power.
So imagine it. Their teacher is dead. Their movement looks crushed. Judas has betrayed him. Peter has denied him. The crowd has turned. The leaders look victorious. Rome has made its statement.
And the disciples are not standing in the streets preaching boldly. They are scattered, shaken, and afraid.
John's Gospel gives us one of the clearest details. After the crucifixion, the disciples gather behind locked doors because they fear the authorities. That detail matters.
Locked doors, not a worship service, not a public sermon, not a strategy meeting for global evangelism. Locked doors.
And that makes sense. If your leader has just been killed, and everyone knows you followed him, the obvious question is, are we next?
Exactly. Their fear was not imaginary. They were connected to a man Rome had crucified and religious leaders had condemned. That put them in a dangerous position.
But it was not only fear, it was disappointment. They had left jobs, families, reputations, and normal lives because they believed Jesus was the Messiah. Now he was buried.
That is the emotional weight people skip. They did not just lose a teacher. They lost the future they thought God was building.
Luke captures that feeling on the road to Emmaus. Two followers say, "We had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel." That phrase is devastating. We had hoped.
Hope in the past tense.
That is not unbelief in a simple way. That is wounded faith. They believed, and now they did not know what to do with the ruins of that belief.
This is where biblical context matters. Many Jews believed in a final resurrection at the end of the age, but they were not expecting one individual Messiah to rise in the middle of history after being crucified by Rome.
So when people say, why did they not understand immediately? Maybe the better question is, would we have understood any faster?
Probably not. Grief does not process theology neatly.
And remember, they were not reading the finished New Testament. They did not have centuries of Easter sermons, creeds, paintings, hymns, and church tradition. They were living through the event in real time.
They had fear, guilt, memories, and a sealed tomb.
We also need to talk about the women, because the Gospels show them acting with remarkable devotion.
Yes. The women watched the burial, prepared spices, and went to the tomb early. But this is important. They were not going to celebrate a resurrection. They were going to honor the body of Jesus.
Exactly. They were carrying burial spices, not victory banners.
So even the most faithful people in the story did not fully understand yet. They loved Jesus, but they thought he was still dead.
That is a key point. Their devotion was real, but their understanding was incomplete. The Bible is honest enough to show that faith can be sincere and confused at the same time.
Put that in the comments, sincere but confused.
That phrase explains so much of the story, and honestly, so much of us.
The disciples' confusion also makes the resurrection accounts feel more grounded. If someone were inventing a heroic origin story, they probably would not make the first followers look fearful, slow to understand, doubtful, and ashamed.
Right. Peter denies Jesus. Thomas doubts. The men hide. The women go to the tomb expecting death, not resurrection. This is not propaganda that flatters the heroes.
It is painfully honest.
And while the disciples are afraid, Matthew tells us the religious leaders are trying to secure the tomb. They go to Pilate because they remember Jesus said he would rise, and they fear the disciples might steal the body.
That is ironic. The enemies of Jesus seem more alert to his resurrection prediction than his own disciples.
Yeah, but they do not believe he will rise. They are worried about rumors, fraud, and public influence.
Exactly. They are trying to control the narrative. They want to prevent the story of Jesus from continuing after his death.
Ancient damage control.
Basically, we killed the leader. Now we need to kill the movement.
Yes, but Jesus' words were still alive in people's memory. Even his opponents remembered that he had spoken about rising.
Meanwhile, what are the disciples actually doing? Hiding? Grieving? Maybe arguing? Maybe blaming themselves? Maybe replaying the Last Supper, the garden, the arrest, the denial?
Peter especially. He said he would die with Jesus, then denied knowing him 3 times.
Peter's failure is central because it shows the resurrection did not come to perfect believers waiting confidently. It came to people who had collapsed under pressure.
That is a better gospel than the cleaned up version.
But were they cowards? Or were they traumatized humans in an impossible situation?
Maybe both.
We should not simplify them. Their fear was real. Their failure was real. But the danger was also real. The cross was designed to terrify everyone connected to the condemned person.
So hiding was not heroic, but it was understandable.
Correct.
Here is where the debate gets uncomfortable. If this happened today, people would cancel the disciples before Pentecost.
Peter denies Jesus. Disciples abandon their leader. Movement collapses after founder's execution. The headlines would be brutal.
And yet God's story was not finished at their worst moment. Their confusion before the resurrection did not disqualify them from becoming witnesses after the resurrection.
That might be one of the most powerful parts. They were not chosen because they understood everything immediately. They were restored and sent after they failed.
But before they were sent, they sat in the silence.
Yes, that silence matters. It is the space between trauma and revelation. God had acted, but they had not yet understood what he had done.
That feels very real spiritually. The moment after loss, before clarity.
The tomb is sealed. Heaven seems quiet. The disciples are hiding. The women are preparing spices. The authorities are guarding the grave. Everybody thinks the story is over.
But they are standing inside the pause before the resurrection breaks their understanding open.
And so the resurrection did not come because they reasoned their way into hope?
No. The gospel accounts show the resurrection confronting them. The empty tomb surprises them. The angelic message shocks the women. The risen Jesus appears to his followers. Their understanding comes because God reveals what they could not produce by themselves.
That destroys the idea that Christianity began as wishful thinking. The disciples were not inventing hope. They looked defeated.
They had to be convinced.
Exactly. And that is why their later boldness matters. The same frightened group behind locked doors becomes a public witness movement. Something changed them.
And it was not motivational speaking.
It was not a better religious strategy.
It was the encounter with the risen Christ, and later the empowerment of the Holy Spirit. But before that, they were still in fear, grief, and confusion.
So what did the disciples do after Jesus died, before they understood the resurrection? They hid, they grieved, they feared, they remembered. They probably blamed themselves. They stayed together, but barely.
And the women prepared to honor a dead Jesus, not because they lacked love, but because they had not yet understood that life was about to break out of the tomb.
That is the heart of it. They were not waiting like theologians with a finished doctrine. They were mourning like people whose world had ended. Then God interrupted their ending.
So here's the question that will divide the comments. Were the disciples faithless for hiding, or were they simply human?
And would we have done any better?
Answer from the text, not from pride. It is easy to judge frightened disciples from the safety of a resurrection we already know happened.
Comment one word if you want part 2, locked. Because next, we need to talk about what happened when the risen Jesus appeared behind those locked doors.
And we should talk about Thomas too, because people call him the doubter, but maybe he was honest enough to say what everyone else was feeling.
That is worth discussing. The resurrection did not pretend their wounds never happened. It met them inside fear, shame, and confusion, and turned broken followers into witnesses.
Send this to someone who thinks the disciples were fearless from the beginning. They were not. They were scared people before they became bold witnesses. And maybe that is exactly why their story still matters.